Hey, Ryan. Yeah. You remember for the Halloween episode, I never did a costume.
Yep.
I've got a costume now. What character am I?
Oh, you're the knife hand guy.
No, you shithead. I'm Mr. Krabs.
Fuck you. Welcome back to the Season 3 finale of Overtly Critical. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Corwin.
Can you believe it's the end of Season 3?
It's kind of insane that, we've done 3 seasons already, and that, we've gone from one subscriber, who was probably my mom, to 150, 156
166.
166? Jesus, that is
As
impressive.
of yesterday.
Ryan, what movie did we watch this week?
This week we watched Edward Scissorhands, directed by Tim Burton, I believe. Written by Tim Burton? Or it might have been, actually, I think the screenwriter was a woman in this film. I'm either remembering incorrectly. I don't remember, but this is a Tim Burton movie, either way. And I picked this film in our fantasy category. Yes, because you had
once again losing out to Where the Wild Things Are. You lamos. I might put that on our season next list just without a vote, or I'll rig the results. But anyways,
I really want to do a Tim Burton movie, and this is one that I have a lot of childhood memories with. It's one of those films that I've seen it before, but it's been 10 years, so I really haven't seen it in a long time. And Tim Burton fascinates me because he's one of those few directors who just has a style. He really is an auteur, and that doesn't exist as much nowadays. And what I really respect about him is he takes expressionism right back to its roots of German expressionism, and he's able to modernize it. And I always thought that this film was the best case of that. For some reason, I remember it being a family movie. It kind of reeks of having those very innocent, wholesome, fish out of water moments, but the film does have a lot of adult themes in it, which I respect it for.
This was a movie that I never actually watched growing up, which is funny because it was always on our DVD shelf. My parents had watched it when it came out, and they both liked it, but I think they held off on playing it for my brother and I just because of some of those more adult moments that are maybe not. I would say maybe a little too confusing for when you're a kid. And of course, I was a big Tim Burton fan as a kid because I was, very weird, kind of goth, but didn't know it. I loved Corpse Bride, Nightmare Before Christmas, and this was really kind of fulfilling a childhood dream to finally see this movie. And sort of like I said earlier with Terminator, and I was really impressed by it. It's this great sort of gothic fairy tale that only Tim Burton could make, because there is this great innocence to the story of Edward is, this very innocent character, and even just the other characters as well, just, they come off more as archetypes than people, but that works to the story's advantage and the themes. Visually spectacular and really quite memorable moments throughout. It is just an iconic movie, and I think in general Tim Burton's work had such a major impact on our generation and what aesthetics we like, what kind of art we gravitate towards.
Yeah, which again is funny because he basically embodies this style that's 100 years old at this point too, which is really fun to think about.
Very Victorian as
well. Just the design of this film, and one thing I really respect about it, a lot of the effects, or I think at least some of the models and all that stuff was designed by Stan Winston and his team, who have they made a lot of good stuff. I mean, they were working on Jurassic Park when that was coming out. He almost helped make the Godzilla movie in America, which failed. Jan de Bont would have directed that. That's a tragedy. Anyway, the design of this movie, it's not only just well done and very unique, but I like the fact that there's practical effects in this movie.
It's so much practical too.
It's matte paintings, and then the biggest one for me is the miniature of the town. Tim Burton is a big fan of Godzilla films and kaiju movies. I'm pretty sure in what was his first film? Was it Pee-wee's?
That might have been his first feature film, and his first short film was Frankenweenie, which was claymation. Well,
there's a scene where Pee-wee breaks into a film set, and they're shooting a Godzilla movie with the suits and everything. So I like to think that he's I know nowadays like a lot of his films use CGI, but I still respected the fact that he comes from like those roots of filmmaking, and it totally works in this film, I think at least. But
Yeah, I the practical sets and effects and costumes just really make this movie because the art direction is so good. It is so creative and unique. And it's got this great clash between this gothic feel and then this sort of like 1960s suburbia exaggerated feeling. I know we talked about getting that feeling of like how the Who's are presented in the sacrilegious and should never be seen live
funny.
action Grinch and Cat in the Hat. I would defend this till I die. They're bad.
they're funny.
They are a little funny. I can't actually argue that. But, it's such a great clash between these styles. It really creates the feeling and the I'm trying to say it's what makes this movie iconic.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a memorable thing. I think to get into, the plot of the film is pretty simple. This guy that lives up in this this mansion at the top of this, or sort of like at the end of this, kind of dead end suburban neighborhood road, is a man with scissor hands, and turns out he can carve things really well.
Yes, which that's definitely how scissors work.
Oh, yes.
on hands. That does kind of make me want to think about what I like about this movie is that the internal logic of this film is never questioned because this is a fairy tale by its nature. No one questions why there's this big gothic manor on a like cartoonish mountain in the middle of town. No one questions why Edward has scissor hands, why he can carve ice. No one questions where the frick the ice comes from, except for Dan.
It is as storybook as it can get. Literally, the old version of Kim is telling a story to her grandchild.
By a grandmother telling a story to her grandchild.
I would, I guess to just jump into the film, the first thing that I notice is that I liked how the film starts with a lot of close-ups rather than wide shots. As we get the score, we get like close-ups of the factory and of like the machines. And it's a good way to like just kind of build curiosity in the beginning.
It's the stylistic thing of like giving you, pieces of the story before we really understand the significance and just building interest and intrigue and sensation and feeling before we get into the actual nuts and bolts of the story.
It's also good. What I noticed on the second watching is that if you actually pay attention to what they're showing, you can actually get a little bit of a tease of like things that are going to happen as well, like with the hands and with a couple things like that. It's not like masterfully done, but it's like they give you little teases of what's going to happen, but you don't notice that the first time. But the second time I rewatched it, I was like, oh,
I also like that the credits are like.
Yes,
That's
yes,
cute.
it does do that. We talked about the idea that there's this juxtaposition of this gothic mansion to this very modern, clean, colorful suburban town. The funny thing on face value is like, oh, it's reality mixed with fantasy. But the idea of suburbia is sort of this fantastical idea in itself. And it's almost perfect for someone like Tim Burton because it is a fantasy. Like a lot of like Levitt towns did actually kind of look like this, but not quite. And he exaggerates it because that was the idea. So it almost kind of works in that they are in their own ways fantasy worlds. If that kind of makes sense.
No, I get what you're saying with that. The suburbia represents the like 1950s dream of the nuclear family and having this own little enclosed world. And I guess ambrosia salad if you don't have a working stomach or taste buds. But it is this this idealistic world, and the whole story is driven by the kindness of Peg. That's her name, right? Peg.
Fuck do I know?
I think her name's Peg. Wait. Yes, it's Peg, 'cause I wrote down my notes.
White woman salesman.
Who is just, desperate to find someone to buy it, so she finds Ed, brings him down, and everyone is so fascinated by him because he's this out-of-place character, this little homunculus doll man with scissor hands, and he is fascinated in turn by them. It's like the clash of these two different worlds, these two different fantasies. It's almost like kind of a play on the typical kind of Frankenstein type thing, or even I think I talked about this. It's almost like similar to the way that the Grinch story is structured, of like this strange guy coming down from the mountain to interact with the village, but rather than him being predatory and attacking the villagers, the story flips on itself, and they eventually are predatory towards him. Very literally in the case of Joan.
It's not that difficult of a read into this movie that the way that people react to Edward Scissorhands is exactly how they would react to a minority coming into like a gated community like this. It is a very like surface level read of the film. And again, because this is a satire in a lot of ways, it's super exaggerated. Like he is very, very different from everyone. But you can't help but to feel that Tim Burton purposely set this in suburbia to make this point.
I don't know if he intentionally did, because Tim Burton doesn't generally, at least knowingly, tackle issues of diversity in his films, but it's a valid read of the movie.
I mean, the way that I looked at it, I was like, they looked at it like, oh my God, it's some black man in our in our gated neighborhood, or it's some queer or something like that.
Unfortunately, a thing that happened in 1950s America.
Yeah.
For those of you who had to read Raisin in the Sun in high school.
And then the thought that I had during the movie is when that crazy horny character.
Oh God! Oh,
to me, that just confirms that
the rapist.
That
let's
viewpoint.
call her what she is. She's a one.
Yes.
She basically tries to rape Edward.
She took advantage of Edward, and then when people turned against, or when he didn't, reciprocate that, she turned around and blamed him for it. Which,
What did she think was going to happen with the Scissorhands?
She's dirty. She's dirty.
I cannot think of anything that you can do with scissors so that would not, end in bodily harm. And maybe this is a thought, a line of thought maybe we shouldn't explore further. Anyways, deeper in the story.
Yeah. The thing that I really liked a lot about this film is that again, and like in every single way, this film is really commenting on this sort of idealistic modern suburban life. And what I really like is that it's pretty much saying that Edward is valuable. People are weirded out by Edward, but he becomes valuable to them when he becomes useful. It's almost like when they realize they can make him into a gimmick, a little later in the film, when he can be profitable for something. That's when they can exploit him for entertainment. Then they love Edward. He's great. But as soon as he's not, they want to throw him out. And at the end, they're like, basically the cop makes it seem that he killed him, and they're okay with that. That was probably the best thing that I read into this film.
I share a lot of those thoughts of that Edward is only embraced by his community when he is seen as a novelty or then later useful.
Yes.
And then as soon as the more like, negative sides of who he is, like his basically, curse of having scissor hands starts to show itself when he accidentally hurts people or damages things around him or gets angry because he's a person, not an object.
Yep.
The community lashes out against him again and they reject him.
And this plays into the fact, like, they also make it very clear in this film that, the sort of consumerist suburban culture this is, it's basically a culture of, like, fads, essentially. It's like, oh, my neighbor has this, so I want that. It's totally the kind of culture that breeds. So it's like, oh, somebody gets a haircut from Edward Scissorhands. I want my hair to be cut by Edward Scissorhands.
I love how they're infatuated by the way he shapes the world around him.
Yeah.
Because we already see how Edward, like, the art that he creates, because he is an artist. That's basically who he is. Probably a bit of autobiography in this, an autobiographical element to this, I should say. With, like, the topiary he creates in the mansion that he then creates in the neighborhood, and how he basically does that to the hair as well. And they're infatuated by this. They think it's so cool and new. And then as soon as they don't like him, they don't like that anymore. They think it's gaudy and gross.
Yeah. That's kind of funny. Now that you say that, being autobiographical, that would make a lot more sense.
Yeah, I mean, not directly autobiographical.
He's got the same haircut as Tim Burton.
I mean, there's definitely elements of, there is an autobiographical element to this. I did sort of have the thought that I feel like the character design of Edward was probably written first. Like he was a drawing first, I bet, or something, just because he's such a unique little design for a character that I feel like the story was written around him. This fable, this fairy tale was created to give the character something to do, which is fine.
You can also say there's a little bit of like Beauty and the Beast in this film, because it's like the young beautiful girl is the only one that loves this crazy beast man humanoid thing. It's a cute love story. It really is. It takes a little bit to like get going, because I don't think Kim comes into the movie until like 30-40 minutes into it, but I like it.
I think this story kind of is made to be a tragedy in part because of how shitty Kim is at first, until like after the midpoint to Edward. She at best is sympathetic to him at the beginning, and at worst she is like just completely disturbed by him. She doesn't make any of the right choices until it's a little too late to make them, and they never end up together because of that, which is the tragic part of the story, aside from him getting ousted, ostracized from society. To me, I was a lot more into the relationship between Peg and Edward. Just like, it didn't really occur to me until the second time we watched this, just how kind of woman Peg is. And I was totally expecting her character to flip at some point, and no. Until the very end, she is just incredibly kind towards Edward, and she feels guilty for making this happen because she brought Edward down here.
Yes.
And like the way we're first introduced to her, I was expecting her to be just this one-off character. I didn't think she was going to be one of the core characters.
I think ultimately another one of the realities that this movie kind of explains at the end that makes it a tragedy is that even at the end, Peg is like, he was never going to make it here. We shouldn't have brought him here. It's like, it's almost like a sad ending in the way where it's like, he just needs to stay with his own kind or stay in his own space because it's just too dangerous for him here. It's kind of sad that like she comes to that realization. It makes it even more of a tragedy.
She tries to make Edward fit in with like, the makeup and the suit that he can't really pull off properly, and trying to adopt him into her family, and it just totally backfires, of course. The ending of this movie is, I found it a bit jarring because it's a kind of a pessimistic ending, and it's played off as very cutesy or like, very like romantic in a way, like with the great romantic score by Danny Elfman and the snow falling, and like you can still see me dancing, and sometimes it's like, you could have visited him.
Yeah,
he wasn't that far away. There was a middle ground to be reached here. I don't know how I feel about the end of this movie.
A part of me wonders if like, because this is Kim telling the story, maybe she's exaggerating, like this is maybe a dumb take. Maybe she's like exaggerating just how close he was to the rest of them or something like that. Like maybe he wasn't right smack next to their town, or maybe the details were fudged when she's telling the story or retelling it. I don't know. I don't think it excuses what you're saying, but that's a thought that I'm having about it.
It's a fair thought, but that's not what I got at all from it.
That's fine. And I would like to talk about...
Yeah.
I want to talk about the design of this movie. I know you probably have more to say about probably like the mansion. I do have some things to say about that. But one thing that I really liked about, like, obviously the design of the houses in this film, it's a very, very saturated movie. But one thing that I noticed is that, like, the houses have, like, 4 or 5 colors. They're either, like, hot pink, white, light blue, light green, and I think yellow. And I was trying to notice if they had an exact order, but I noticed that they didn't when they got to a wide shot. I was like, damn it. But it's, like, very cookie cutter. They have, like, 5 options of colors for their houses. And another thing I noticed is that the paint designs on the garage doors are one of 2 kinds, either horizontal diamonds or vertical diamonds. That's like the only differences the houses have. It's just such a nice detail because it's so hard to differentiate everyone from each other, except maybe the crazy Christian lady, but that's like the inside of her house.
The art design of this suburban little dream town is colorful but bland. It's big blotches of color with no detail, as opposed to the design of Edward and a lot of the mansion, which is darker tones, but much more detail.
Oh, yeah. And I think the one thing that I wrote down about at least in the flashbacks of like the factory, is I like that the machines, God, this might be a stretch, but the machines are almost like a perfect combination of like modern appliances that you'd find in these suburban homes with this sort of gothic design infused into them. Just like Edward going into these towns is kind of like that same thing. It's like the clash of these two things.
I didn't quite read that angle into it, but that's really interesting, actually. What I really liked about the sequence where we first get to meet the inventor, which is just played wonderfully by Vincent Price, it's a sequence where he says no words at first. Actually, he just says no words in that first sequence, and later, when in the other sequences, he does say things. But we learn so much about his character through the machines he makes, because each of these machines is very human.
Yeah.
Like the way they're stomping, the way they have faces and hands. We can tell that he is fascinated with creating people, creating life. But what I like is that you have this mad scientist on a hill, this trope, and what is he doing with his inventions? He's baking cookies.
Yeah.
This super just cute, wholesome, loving thing. This is probably the nicest man on earth. Like, he's reading poetry to his little doll son he creates. I really, really enjoyed that sequence. And I like just how Vincent Price's character, with just his eyes even, gets across this like childlike wonder that the inventor has.
That's a word that I wrote down, and I guess I don't want to spoil too much for the audio section, but that's like something I think Tim Burton's just good at, where he takes sort of these like expressionist themes, and he's able to put like a little bit of a childish wonder to
a
it.
whimsy to it.
Oh, I guess I have a couple criticisms of this movie. I'm just gonna say them because I don't know. I think the ending in the beginning, the fucking makeup they put on Winona Ryder is awful. It's so fucking stupid.
I was pretty sure that was makeup, because I thought that is the
it's
weirdest old person they've ever
It's
found.
not even that. It's the voice. Just hire an old woman. I'm sorry. Anyway, that, and the one thing that I kind of didn't like about this is that a lot of I think it was the scene of the can, which is, again, what made me think of, like, suburban household appliances and how he gets a flashback from that. The can opening scene. When we get the shot of the can and then of him, this is such a fucking nitpick, I know. But I feel like they could have done that in less shots. Him seeing this can opening and then having the flashback of the factory. They go back and forth between the two like a couple times. And I know they kind of do it to make a match cut.
They redo the move,
but
too.
it's like... It's almost like a, hey, dumb audience, get it, and I didn't like that very much. I thought a lot of the camera moves in the film were fine, but like that one was like a weird, like, I just didn't like that. But anyway, that's an annoying nitpick.
You know what? I think I found a way to articulate why I didn't like the ending of this movie very much, which is the lesson of this movie is basically people aren't going to accept you, so you should lock yourself away.
Yeah,
and that's just I understand that sometimes stories don't have happy endings, but I feel like if you're writing a story clearly aimed for kids, and this movie is definitely aimed for kids, like just the way it's told.
I did look. It is PG-13, but it does have a family kind of.
I think it's PG-13 more because of some of the edginess to it, not because it's trying to be tongue-in-cheek, really, I
probably
think.
The blood. But.
Well, yeah, the blood is probably the biggest thing, and also the friggin' almost rape scene. But I think it's not a great lesson for kids. And I think that I remember my parents had told me they didn't want me to see it because they part of it was they said the ending was too sad. And it's not that it's sad that's the problem. It's that it's not a good moral, really. And this is a fairy tale. And there's an argument that, of course, like I said earlier, you don't have to have a story with a happy ending, but it just feels kind of off to me.
Yeah, it is a tragedy, so I guess I can feel like it's a pass in that way, but I do. The only saving grace I say for that is because I think there are so many reads of this movie that apply to the real world that I think in some ways, as fantasy as it is, it also is kind of realistic in that way. And you can see it more as depicting what these gated communities do to people rather than what's supposed to happen. That's kind of the way that I saw it.
Mm.
I saw that ending as a tragedy because I ultimately see this film. I don't know. I saw this film as more of a commentary on suburbia than anything. So I'm okay with that ending. Just as a depiction of, you know what, that kind of sucks that Edward couldn't be with them. And you're left with that and you're like, fuck those people. Because that's how I felt about the film. But I guess you do have a fair point in that if it is going to be a sort of a fairy tale, it is kind of a shit.
Yeah, and I should kind of as an end cap here say that, I'm not saying that the ending ruins the film. I really enjoyed this, and I'm not even saying I'm right about the ending of the film. That's just kind of how the movie made me feel. But I did greatly enjoy this. It is a wonderfully dark, whimsical fairy tale that only Tim Burton could tell.
Oh yeah, that's really why I wanted to talk about a Tim Burton movie at some point, because he's just got such a unique flair, and it's also helped by like some auteurs are really good at this, where they'll have, he always has Danny Elfman, he always has Johnny Depp, so it's almost like the full Tim Burton experience when you're watching his films. It's a combination of his visuals, his actors, his production designers, all that stuff. So I really enjoyed this film.
I did too. All right, we should throw it over to Dan, or rather get Dan up here, and we'll talk about the audio of this movie. It has a great score, of course, some really good sound design moments.
It's a shitty score.
You shut the
Okay.
All right. This is the fun section, the audio section that you all know and love about the movie Edward Scissorhands. He's got scissors for hands, and to be honest, I did not know he was an artificial human, but we'll leave that aside and then pretend like I did. All right, so everyone obviously knows that this movie was about a guy with hands that were scissors, or scissor hands, whatever you want to call them. And personally, the first thing I thought when I saw them was, they're not clean. But most importantly, that sound design was phenomenal, especially bringing enlightenment to a character that kind of looks scary and doing all these things that you wouldn't expect scissors to do, like ice carving. Where'd he get the ice? Personally, though, what I really love about this is, just in general, the snipping adds humor to a very dark-themed character, especially one that hasn't gotten out a lot. It seems like his special talents are what drag everyone in. I could pay them money to not give him the makeup he has, because I thought that was terrible. But aside from that, is like, you don't see this kind of like audio work in another movie. No one else is going to have scissors for hands. It's just iconic.
I just imagine like either one of two things. Either when they were like doing the sound for those scenes, either they had a couple sounds and they layered them like 9 billion on top of each other, or someone's just spamming with a fucking microphone and they're just...
As honest, as much as I wish the latter option was the case, because that would be amazingly funny to see in like blooper shots for filming the movie somewhere probably on YouTube. There's no doubt in my mind that it's just snips played back together over and over, layered on top of each other in just such a fast pace, and fast sound effects kind of makes things humorous.
I like how when he cuts the paper, it's like ridiculously fast, and the things like are flying everywhere. Some with the ice, like makes it snow.
Well, that's another thing that makes this really funny, is that you hear the sound effects, but you don't see it happening, so you can't really picture in your mind how he does it so fast. The second thing I kind of noticed, and this is more towards the beginning of the film, and I just caught it on, and whether it's practical or not, it just really bugged me a bit, and that is, like, things being smacked around were way too loud. I don't know if you heard, like, as she was walking up to the house, her shoes were clobbering. This was not, like, subtle. She was far away from the camera, and therefore I kind of think that the sound should be a little quieter in general. It's like you throw a frisbee, and as it gets farther away, it's supposed to get quieter. Her shoes did not get quieter.
I didn't really notice that, but
it again, may not be noticeable, but I kind of just thought of it, and it's annoying. It just sounded like bricks.
That is kind of just my lack of experience with audio, but I think like if they did make that louder than the other sound effects in the scene, it's because she's the focal point of the scene, so it makes sense.
Yeah. It may be, but this is just like sound tidbits I really don't like.
It could be to draw significance to it as well. I mean, I think probably a good reason why they did it is because there's literally no other sound in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
And just considering, like, especially with, like, houses, how sound can reflect on, like, driveways and stuff, maybe it just did sound that fucking loud when she was the only person walking around.
It might have, but if it were me, I would have changed that in post. And that's just a me thing.
No, I know.
So
I think
not
there's
everyone.
also a fair debate between, like, you know, everything in this movie's exaggerated to hell anyway, but
Well,
regardless.
it's not that it's just like overdone. It's kind of like crude, and I apply this to when she's putting the cream on Edward's face, and it sounds like the most gooey stuff.
Oh, I hated that.
That made my teeth grind,
That's
and
great.
I
It's
really
great.
hated it. It's so good that it's bad, or should I do that the other way? It's so bad that it's good.
It's very intentionally uncomfortable.
This movie's scores were really good for this film. I don't know if that applies to anything else. It was not.
What do you mean by that?
It's
For-
not.
good
It's
for
not.
this
It's
film?
not the best music placement in the world. I personally wish, as much as this might be the case, this might not be the case. I get it's fantasy. I get it's like a fantasy character who was made in a lab and can't really die unless he's broken. I really dislike the Nightmare Before Christmassy feel, where it's like you take a suburban movie that is about to get into Christmas, kind of like the Who's in Whoville, and you combine it with this one out-of-place Halloween-like character. I just don't like the theme change. They do it a lot in the film whenever they switch to Edward getting mad or have him solely on screen. They have scary music, or when he was back in the house, it's like you get the creepy, mysterious mansion vibe. And then during the backstories with his father, it's kind of like the factory scenes. Now that stuff I love. I love the use of timpani in that kind of music, and it fits. It's scary, it's boomy, it's Halloween factory. I mean, guys making cookies, and I love that bit. But it feels out of place for the rest of the film.
I think the entire genius of much of Danny Elfman's compositions and his scores for films is that they walk the line between creepy and whimsical, which is the Tim Burton style. That's the whole point of this movie, is Edward is kind of a creepy character, but he's also very whimsical and he's very innocent. And it totally amplifies the fairy tale feel of this movie. That was my favorite part of it.
And he's also out of place.
Exactly, exactly, and I get
But
that.
it's perfect for that. That's what I'm saying. It makes sense in the story if you have these elements of like, oh, Christmassy and Halloween, because that's kind of the point of Edward's character. I mean, you could even say that, like, you know, like, because Christmas is a lot like, ooh, colorful. It's kind of like that, and he more visually he's kind of closer to the look of Halloween. So you can almost see these two things as like Christmas and Halloween coming together anyway. So I think it works perfectly.
I really like one thing that really stuck out to me with the score is whenever Esmeralda, the crazy Christian lady, comes around, the deeper, more bass instruments in the orchestra will come out. Like, I mean, forgive me for getting this wrong, but like I think there was some bassoon in there, or some might have been sousaphone. I don't know, but just, you know, very. I'm sure I got them wrong, but deep, low bass instruments start to come out to show like the
Intensity.
Not just the intensity, but the foreboding nature of her. Just like, what's the word?
Her presence.
Her presence and the way she kind of foreshadows. That's the word I was looking for. What's going to happen with Edward and the town? The rift that is developing between them.
Yeah.
Themes.
Well, I guess, I mean, the score, I would like to talk about the score. I mean, at least for me, the main thing that I noticed is that, at least in the opening credits, because that's really where I most paid attention to it, because honestly, I felt that's where it kind of worked the best, because it was only that and sort of the visuals of that opening. It's got that, like, it has that childlike flair to it, that innocent flair to it, which totally works with both the inventor and Edward, and I really like that. Oh god, I'm gonna sound like a fucking. I don't know why I'm idiot. What's the instrument where it's like do 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 do, the little
Xylophone?
Marimba or xylophone.
Okay, well yeah, that little it's like sounds like that are like very very innocent sounding. However, Danny Elfman's score can also sound like, you know,
Dark and powerful.
yes, it's just, you know, sonically a way to do what they do in the film visually, basically.
Danny Elfman is one of the most like iconic composers of our generation, or like of the past, like, you know, 30, 40 years in cinema, because he can create such different feelings as music, but it's always very noticeably him. I mean, like, this is the same guy who, for people who don't know, did the iconic Batman score from the 80s. A specific element that stuck out to me in this soundtrack was, and it's something he does in a lot of his soundtracks, is the way he uses, like, choirs to, like, create that awe feeling of, like, the ooh feeling, which can either work to be like a spooky feeling and something more like Nightmare Before Christmas or The Corpse Bride.
I associate that very much with Christmas carols and holiday songs because a lot of choirs will do that.
To me, more it's that feeling of, like, awe-inspiring and wonder and just intrigue. And I like it a lot. His music just reminds me of, like, a roller coaster. The way it flows and builds and, you know, like, builds to a peak and then comes crashing down again.
Danny Elfman has the ability in this, like, specifically in this film, to, you know, the music goes through different tone shifts, but it all feels so cohesive. It all feels like part of the same thing, even though it's invoking different emotions at different points.
It's so smooth.
It's so uniquely him as well. It's all like it's like an album. It's like when an album just sounds so cohesive with itself. It's great.
You know, this movie personally made me feel very angry after watching it. I really liked some design, and then I didn't, and then I didn't some more. And the only way for me to not be angry is to become funny. See you in the next season, guys. See you in the next season.
So it's time to talk about our lessons that we learned from Edward Scissorhands. You can lead us off.
So my lesson from this movie comes from a concept that I was introduced to in one of my first video classes here at college, which is this idea of contrast in content. The entire visual feel of this movie and the story is based around the two extremes that are this kind of gothic, Victorian, expressionist design with Edward and the inventor and the mansion, and the exaggerated, bland normalcy that is suburbia in this. It's not, exactly normal. It's got way too bright colors and disgusting hairdos and ridiculous outfits, but it creates this not only really compelling image, but it creates a compelling story. And I think that as filmmakers, we can learn a lot from this movie, the way it uses this contrasting content, because if either of these extremes were toned down, the movie would not be as good. It's so visually striking and emotionally compelling to see this guy with, like, these straps on his weird bodysuit and these scissor hands and this crazy black hair and this whited out face with lipstick. My phone is going off. Walking through this street that are these bright pink and green and white and blue houses with these people in their weird little hairdos. It's great. It creates this way better feeling.
Obviously that too, and the fact that, like, the mansion's on a fucking hill, and this is just, like, plains of no fucking geographical variance at all, and it's just big ass fucking hill out of nowhere. It's great. My lesson is more kind of leaning into the satirical side of it. The fact that it kind of plays into what you're saying with exaggeration, but in a different way. What I really liked about this movie is because it is a satire, it overgeneralizes things to almost a laughable point, which is the point of satire. And my favorite parts of that are big letters, just bank, that's it. It's like a white building, the gray text, and then even inside the bank, there's like one vault, there's one desk with like one teller. It's just like the most. It's as small, it's as simple as the movie needs it to be, and as the camera needs it to be. It doesn't give you any illusion that there's anything outside of this. The same thing with the neighborhood. You don't really, there's like maybe one or two shots that might show something outside of this like cul-de-sac, but other than that, it's just fucking skies around it. It's almost like it's so perfectly placed here, and it kind of works. I can get like, it might take you out of it, but that's the point of it. There's the bank. You saw the Bland High. Like, she goes to Bland High School, Kim does. The plumber. First of all, his truck says plumbing in just white text, and the guy's name is Guy. And I'm pretty sure like the strip mall they go to, it's like gateway something. It's like a gated community. That's what I got from that. I don't know. It's just like all of these really absurd things work so well because it's just good satire. It's exposing the sort of absurdities of the subjects of the film, and that's what it worked really well for.
I completely agree, but there's one part I think you're missing. And that is that it's not just because it's satire, it's because it's a fairy tale.
Oh, yeah, that too.
It's fantasy. Think about, like, in classic fairy tales like Brothers Grimm or like Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales that you read, and it's like a long time ago in a kingdom, and it's like this king, and it gives you these elements, and it doesn't give you the context for it or like any historical thing. Like, no one cares who Snow White or her mom, what country they're from, what their family history is, because that's just not relevant to the moral story that's trying to be told here.
It's only showing the elements it needs, and that's it. It's not making an effort to show, hey, there's houses outside this neighborhood, or hey, there's more details to this bank building. I really like that a lot. But no, yeah, that's also true. It's like, yes, that's a good point. I guess we have another section to do. It's the mysterious man himself, Joseph Koenig, who
He's out of prison?
yes, finally he was in prison.
I gotta get the fuck out of here.
Hey guys, it's welcome to Funny Notes. I guess I'm getting fired. Why try? Just why? Don't. If you're losing on your business, just stop trying. Just give up, go back home, be a good wife. Dude, I love it how my house looks like orange and I think it was green. Or maybe blue, I don't know. It's one of those two colors, but it's basically a Christmas present. I want my house to be a wrapped present. You know that house on the top of the mansion? That could be 1 million. No, not even 1. 2 million with inflation. That's a good expensive house he's got right there. Free real estate on top of a hill. View of the ocean?
Hey, it's a seller's market.
This is the perfect buying opportunity. Hold on, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I just broke into your house. Don't be afraid. Women are cute and so squishy and not have guns.
Remember, kids.
Mom, my water broke. Water bed.
God damn.
The 1980s is brought to you by Sears when they wanted to rule the entire world and want to be in every one of your demographics as possible. They wanted you to eat Sears. They wanted you to sleep Sears. They wanted you to breathe Sears. God, spoon feed me, ladies. Put all those spoons right up to my mouth. This movie is brought to you by all the product placements like Budweiser, Ajax, Sugar in the Raw. Oh yes, Edward, cut me! I'm gonna be so suggestive. I want you to snip my fucking bra off. Alright, today we're gonna be talking about one of my special presentations about double-coated dogs. You cannot take off the fur on double-coated dogs. That ruins them. They do not like that. Double coat means they stay warm in the winter and cool in the summer. So you don't snip those double-coated dogs. Poodles, those are single-haired. So yeah, that makes sense when the poodle. But like double-coated dogs, you're just fucking up your dog. But I guess, white girl problem. Sick nice Starbucks latte. Right in the hometown of the South gated community. The love agenda versus the asexuals. What the fuck? This is what we're talking about. We're like, what the fuck? Hey, you want a loan? Well, you're going to have to buy a car first. I wish women were more upfront, like the people that were in the movie. I don't love you anymore. Well, it's time to live back out on the streets and eat some breadcrumbs. I'll get back to you if they'll hire me again.
So that was Edward Scissorhands, and that was Joey, and that was Dan, and that was me, and that was Corwin. That was everybody, and that was everything.
That was me. I didn't know.
So with this being the last episode of this season, obviously we're going to have a recap video. But this being our last episode, what is happening with Season 4?
So, in this, our show, part of the point of why we do this is that Ryan and I are aspiring filmmakers, and next semester we have gotten the opportunity, without disclosing anything we can't disclose, to produce a independent short film that we have written. And it's a very, I should say we're in the process of actually writing the script right now, but it is very ambitious, and it's going to eat up all of our time. And we already this season, I think we were kind of having some issues keeping up on the editing and the production. We, as you all know, watching this, we took a break from doing weekly episodes. So for the next semester of our classes and the next season of the show, or rather, we're normally a season 4 would go, we're taking a break. I don't think we can say there won't be any episodes. We might occasionally get, maybe like a fun episode in there, but it's going to be a break from a regular upload schedule, probably until the summer.
Yeah, that's the safest thing to expect is season 4 will happen, but it's going to start way later than, January like it would. So we're not going away, but we're taking a break, and maybe there will be behind the scenes scoops of what we're doing on this channel.
And we will be back.
Maybe, yes, we will. So until then, be sure to watch all these movies that we watched, and in the meantime, when we have a big break, be sure to come up with other movies we should watch and let us know. So
yeah, like this video if you liked it, or if you didn't, just give us a little like. Subscribe to the channel if you want more of this content. It will be coming, even though we're taking a break. And in the comments, let us know what you thought of the movie, what you think of the channel, if we suck, if you really liked it. Fact check me if I'm wrong, because last episode, someone did fact check, not last episode, sorry, 2 episodes ago, someone fact checked me on saying that Robert Zemeckis directed Adventures of Tintin. He was not involved with that project at all. So, fact check us if we say something totally stupid.
goodbye.
Bye-bye, folks.